What's up everyone, I'm Eldridge, and it is once again time to sum up the latest CSE stream that happened last Friday, where Mark Jacobs told us a whole bunch of stuff and had a 50-minute long Q&A, I believe. As always, I'm well aware that 1 hour and 15 minutes are far longer than most of you have time to spend on watching a video every day. And so I sat down and once again extracted all the pertinent information that you really should know in preparation for Beta Test 1. So firstly, CSE is still in crunch mode and work is apparently going well. They've added a ton of new stuff over the last week, the most important of which is probably that most of the ability components are now in the game. There was, however, still no definitive announcement about a start date for the beta test. So we're gonna have to wait at least till next week to find out more about that. However, Mark Jacobs gave us a very nice and brief summation of the siege system as he is envisioning it and as it is already being implemented into the game. A big part of the basic siege mechanics are based on historical sieging and siege equipment. So expect to see versions of all 4 of the major catapults, that being trebuchets, onagers, mangonels and ballistae. But he also hinted at some other things, and as part of the Q&A we found out that all of the realms will have their individual siege equipment. We didn't get anything specific, only that it will very much be themed after each of the realms. For UX Dark Age of Camelot players, we will also see some things that were not in Dark Age of Camelot or in Warhammer Online, namely siege towers and ladders. Siege towers and ladders are generally a little bit controversial when it comes to these sort of siege-based PvP games, because they do allow the attacking group to relatively easily avoid a lot of the defenses. And in an online game, it is much harder to man all the walls of a castle than it would be in real life. So ladders and siege towers always feel a lot more overpowered than they actually would be in a real keep siege. This, however, all plays into the counterplay system, which is also supposed to work in the sieges. This meaning that to everything that the attackers can bring, the defenders are going to have something to defend themselves against it. And for every defense that the defenders have, the attackers have a possibility to get around that in some way. Generally, if you ask me, that is a pretty good system, because in a keep siege you never want to have anything that feels entirely unfair. Keep sieges are one of those things in PvP games that can lead very quickly to a lot of negative feelings on one side. If you encounter a keep that is just completely impossible for you to take over and it just feels like you never had any chance to begin with, then you kind of feel like you just wasted a bunch of hours getting ready for this siege. And if the defenders feel like they have no chance defending themselves and the enemies are just climbing into the castle from all sides, then they're going to feel like they just got overrun and building this castle was entirely pointless. And this definitely means that the siege system is going to have to be much more thought out than it ever was in Dark Age of Camelot or Warhammer Online. And the way in which most of this is going to be balanced out is that the defenders are going to have to choose what they want to do with their defenses, and everything they do in keep defenses is going to cost power, of which they only have a limited amount, and if they use too much power, they are going to run the risk of opening a Veilstorm above their heads, potentially destroying the castle. This is especially the case if the defenders use too many automated defenses while also having a bunch of players sitting around. And I do think when players are online, a lot of the automated defenses should have to be scaled back a little bit. And limiting factors for the attackers, of course, are that if they want to build a trebuchet in their hometown or in their castle, and then bring it all the way over to the enemy castle to take that castle down, they can't just take it and put it into their magical bag of holding. They're going to have to put that trebuchet on a caravan and cart it all the way across the lands to the enemy castle and then build it up there. Or they could just take all the metal and rope parts with them and then get all the wood they need locally and build it there, but that's going to take a bunch of time before they can actually start with sieging. And there are various other things that CSE could do to limit what both the attacker and defender have to deal with and how they can counter each other. And let's move on to the Q&A section, because there were quite a lot of really juicy questions asked by the stream audience. Someone asked if Veilstorms are going to be summoning abominations like they do in the stories, and Mark Jacobs said that he would love for this to happen, but as it would be somewhat of a PvE thing, it wouldn't really have that much of a priority. Defenders in a siege will have siege shields. And yes, these are magical barriers that will protect you from projectiles, presumably, and siege weaponry, and might even stop enemies from just going at your wall without destroying the shields first. However, Mark insisted that they would not be spaceshipy force field sort of bubbles, and that they would definitely be more of a directional thing. How exactly this would work, he did not really go into, only that these shields are only one of the choices that the defenders can make as to what defenses they want on their castle. We learned that siege engines are not planned to be really powerful against players. When targeting a player and firing the siege engine, the rock or ballista bolt will not track the target. And as such, it will take a little bit more doing to actually hit a player with a siege engine. If you do, it will probably cause significant damage, but there are no siege engines specifically designed to clear the walls or just outright obliterate the defending forces. All of the siege engines are very much built around defeating towers, gates and walls, bringing down gatehouses, or just weakening the structure so that it can be brought down with other means. Magic in general is supposed to play a whole lot more of a role in Camelot Unchained's keep sieges. The reason for this being that the world is magical and it would definitely make sense for the realms to employ magic in keep sieges. And yes, there was also a mention of magical explosives that could be used for breaching gates, or weak points in a wall, or all sorts of stuff like that. As to actual sapping, i.e. digging under a fortress wall and making it collapse, that will not be in the game because it's not Minecraft. We learned that crafters are assumed to be able to build earthen ramps, which could then be used to scale a wall. Besides carrying all your siege equipment and other nonsense from your home to this castle you're about to siege, caravans are also going to be able to shimmy around already deployed siege engines. This is of course great news because it means that siege engines are not fixed as they were in Warhammer Online and can in fact be moved around. If you have seen the little vine of the first working ballista, you'll have seen that the blocks around the bolt impact just vanish. Eventually they are supposed to crumble and fall down and cause a whole bunch of damage to any innocent bystanders. Veilstorms should always be chaotic and unpredictable. Intentionally summoning a Veilstorm to wipe out the defenders might have the effect to just wipe out the attackers instead. Then somebody asked about firing rotting cow carcasses into the castle, which is of course something that historically happened. It was the first instance of biological warfare before anyone ever knew about germs, which makes it all the more fascinating a subject. And Mark said that while it is a really cool thing, it would not be in the game. And I absolutely concur with this, by the way, because sieges in Camelot Unchained are not going to work like real-world sieges. Real-world, medieval or Dark Age sieges sometimes lasted for weeks or months, because most of the time the attacking force didn't actually do the scaling of the walls. They just encircled the castle or town they were sieging and starved them out. And if you do something like that, then throwing rotting cow carcasses into the castle is obviously a good thing, because it's going to make people sick on top of them already starving. But sieges in Camelot Unchained don't take weeks or months, they take at most a couple of hours. So throwing cows into the place to make people sick is really not going to have any effect on the actual siege. And I personally do not like these sorts of things being replaced by simple dot effects, and as such rotting cow carcasses can just be left out and nothing of value was lost this day, to be honest. However, we did learn that it might be possible to catapult people into the castle. The actual question asked were whether this is possible for small and large races, but I'm pretty sure in the end just anyone is going to be able to be catapulted into the castle. This is something I personally care about quite a lot because I loved that in the initial Warhammer cinematic, and then it never actually was in Warhammer Online, and I was incredibly sad. So having that feature make a return for Camelot Unchained is something that is very dear and near to my heart. Crafters will definitely be able to help out during sieges. They can lay traps, mines, explosives, build barricades or mantlets to protect from siege equipment, and also repair keeps and siege equipment in combat. Now doing so will take longer than repairing them outside of combat would, But being able to repair the keep while it is being attacked is of course something very, very powerful, because it will delay the enemies actually entering the castle and give you more time to call for reinforcements from your faction. All siege equipment are crafted and permanent entities. This means, as I said earlier, that you can't just pull your little trebuchet out of your magic pocket, blow the whistle and then suddenly it appears next to you. You have to actually build the trebuchet, and then the trebuchet is a giant, multiple ton heavy siege implement. And to get it from A to B, you're gonna have to dismantle it, load it onto a caravan and cart it all across the way, or you're gonna have to build it locally. If the defenders shoo you away, they can actually take possession of your trebuchet, or they can destroy it, or they can even salvage it for materials. But siege equipment also does take damage from usage and over time. So if a trebuchet is left somewhere in the forest, eventually it is just going to rot away. Mark said that sieges simply must not end too quickly. If a siege in the game ends up lasting 15 minutes, CSE did something wrong. Of course, a siege shouldn't have to take 8 hours or a couple of days, but there has to be a healthy middle ground somewhere in between this. And I would personally say if a siege lasts anywhere between 1 and 3 hours, that is about the sweet spot. Then Mark raised a rather controversial point, and that is that night raiding empty keeps must not be the most effective way to take a keep. Now, I think it should definitely be possible to rally up your guild at 4 in the morning and go capture an enemy castle that is really difficult to take otherwise, or just for some mischief or whatever. But it should definitely not be the case that all raiding is done overnight while half of the server is asleep. That simply doesn't lend itself to a fun gameplay experience. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to log in every morning seeing that my guild's castle has been taken over again while we were all sleeping. Mark also said that he loved the idea of animals being part of the NPC castle guard, basically to sniff out stealthers and scouts. And he confirmed that it would be possible to reuse enemy arrows fired at the keep or at the attackers and fire them back at their owners. Different materials used for wall construction will have an impact on the wall's strength. So presumably building a keep out of granite is going to be better than building it out of sandstone. Or gods forbid, wood. Now on the topic of players being notified when their castles or possessions are being attacked, CSE wants to first get a whole bunch of player feedback on this very topic. Reason being that it is kind of a controversial thing. On the one hand, if you spend a whole bunch of time building up a really cool castle or a large city, and your entire guild is out on a run, you kind of would like to know that somebody is attacking you. But on the other hand, if they spent a really long time observing you and figuring out that you were about to go on some guild thing, and then waited until you all left and then snuck in and started sieging your castle, don't they kind of deserve to catch you with your pants down because they did such a great job? So I totally understand that this is not a clear-cut issue, and I actually think it's a great thing that they're going to listen to the community on this, because quite honestly, I haven't made up my mind about this either. I don't know which one's gonna be better. I'm gonna have to actually sit down and think a whole bunch about this before I'm gonna be able to make a clear statement on which I think is preferable. And sadly, I think this is one of the issues that's just going to come down to which of these two is just a little bit worse. Mark also said that he really likes the idea of siege replays. He named Clash of Clans as an example, where when you get attacked, you can actually watch a replay of them attacking your defenses and failing horribly, or winning, which would then either provide you with a whole bunch of entertainment, or would give you hints as to where your defenses are lacking. And I think this is a really, really cool thing, and should definitely be something that's implemented for when your castle is raided when there is nobody online. The team would also love to see towns and cities built by players being so great and awesome that they kind of replace the safe capital cities in their functions. We also learned that while NPC guards are definitely a thing and are part of your defenses, there are absolutely positively 100% no keep lords. And I so welcome this change. There was nothing worse in Dark Age of Camelot or Warhammer than spending a whole bunch of time wiping the enemy team, only for then having to fight the stupid health sponge of a PvE end boss, while the last brave bastion of AoE mages was constantly dotting and AoEing into your group. I don't know, maybe some people found it fun, but I thought it played out the same every single time, and it just made Hibernia so incredibly strong after Shrouded Isles because of the mushroom spam. And on the topic of capturing castles, Mark said that razing and destroying castles and buildings must be very laborious and time-consuming. Maybe not as time-consuming as actually building the buildings in the first place, but it should definitely not be instant or take just a couple of minutes. It should be an involved process that takes a bunch of time, giving the original defenders the chance to come back and defend their castle before it is razed to the ground. I agree with this wholeheartedly and definitely think that taking a castle and capturing it and then repairing it and just using it as your own should be the default. Razing and destroying of enemy structures, while definitely fun and something I want to be in the game, it should be something special you do, not something you do every single time you take an enemy keep. Now, if you have a feud with an enemy guild and you take their castle and then raze it to the ground, that's going to feel much better for both you and it's going to feel much worse for them if it's something that doesn't happen all the time, because then it's just the normal state of affairs. Razing a castle or city to the ground, that should be something special, something horrific, because otherwise it has no power, otherwise it is just what happens when you lose your castle. And it is also one of those things that just simply breaks my immersion and makes my realism meter go into the red, because a conquering army simply does not raze everything they come across. That makes no sense whatsoever. It is much cheaper for a conquering army to just rebuild the things they have damaged instead of entirely rebuilding a new castle on top of the old one. Now, any pledge rewards such as house decoration items or some such are never going to be destroyed by other players or stolen by other players. You're always going to be able to keep those because, well, let's face it, nobody really wants that, do they? The last 2 points are pertaining to PvP in general. Mark confirmed that there is going to have to be a balance between objective-based PvP and just regular old roaming PvP. And I completely agree. You don't want one of these to be entirely better than the other. If roaming PvP is the best thing to do for progression, then people are going to be less inclined to do sieges because they are kind of an investment of a bunch of time and are more difficult to do than just going out and killing a bunch of enemies. But on the other hand, you don't want keep sieges or fights for places of power to be all that much better, because then that becomes the norm and all everyone does. You want a nice balance so that there's always back and forth and you have a bunch of sieges going off, there's fights over places of power, but there's also roaming PvP, and most importantly, there's also solo and small scale PvP. Which is the last point on my little list here, that Mark absolutely wants solo PvP and small-scale PvP to be a thing in Camelot Unchained. Part of the reason being that Mark himself is actually a little bit more of a solo player. And so because he's a solo player, of course he wants solo PvP in the game to be at least a thing. Alright guys, that is it for this stream summary. A whole bunch of really cool information. And there will be another stream summary probably this weekend or early next week, depending on when I'm going to get the chance to actually make it. Because at the end of the week there will be another stream focusing once again on Beta 1, or at least that's what it says in the streaming schedule. And there will of course also be a Q&A, so I'm sure there will be a bunch of really cool informational tidbits for me to pull out of and turn into a nice little summation video. And as I said, sometime this week or next week there will also be a really in-depth look at armor, and oh boy, that video is gonna be a doozy. But until then, I've been the CloakingDonkey, and I'll see you in another video!